All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello, everyone. My name is Barb Cardell. I use they, them pronouns. I am the PWN USA Leadership Development and Training Director. And I am so grateful to be with each and every one of you today for our Beyond Choice HIV Disclosure, Violence, and Survival. We called it a webinar, but really what we want to have this be is a community conversation. We named our webinar this because we wanted to really intentionally lift up the conversation around intimate partner violence, especially for people living with HIV, providers of services, and often a complicated conversation that we have around disclosing your status is you are receiving services, but it's not just in intimate partner violence service settings. It also can be in clinical settings. It can be in our church. It can be with our family. But as someone who's been living with HIV since 1991, I know that conversations around disclosure are complicated, that many people have an opinion about when I should disclose my status and when I should not. And we wanted to just have a real honest conversation with you all today. So we are glad to have you here. To get us started, I want to go ahead and dedicate our conversation today to Cicely, Alicia, Patty, and so many other women, people living with HIV who have lost their lives to domestic violence, intimate partner violence, state sanctioned violence from disclosing their HIV status. I bring that forward at the very beginning of our webinar today so that when we talk about being really committed to this conversation, deeply connected at a heart level, at a advocacy level, that we know that so many of our people have been impacted, and we want to just lift them up and center them as we at the very beginning. So thank you for joining us. We have a few logistics just to go through. As you might know, this webinar is being recorded. We want to make sure that we have it available to share with people who aren't able to join us in person, and to be able to share both the resources that we're talking about, but also to share the stories. One of the things that we know is that as people living with HIV, we are asked to tell our stories a lot. And every single time we talk about it, it can be challenging. And so having our stories recorded so that someone can go back and can listen is a way that we also can gift our stories to the future. We'll have time for questions at the end. If you want to just drop them in the chat, that'll be great. Grace is going to be keeping track of the questions, and we will answer them at the end when we have our panel discussion. We're going to go ahead and ask everybody to stay on mute using *6 or your mute button, just so that we can make sure that we do have a really good audio recording. And then finally, for folks who would like to use the closed captioning, there is a CC button at the bottom of your screen where your toolbar is. Go ahead and click on that, and that will enable closed captioning so that you can follow along. If you need any support throughout our conversation today, please go ahead and let us know in the chat. We are happy to have you here and want to make sure that it is accessible and that you are as comfortable as possible for this critical conversation. We have a couple of objectives that we're going to share with you. You always need objectives to make sure that you really are sharing intentionally what we're talking about. So today we hope that everyone will leave feeling as if they have gained a deeper understanding of disclosure and violence, and how it is grounded, how we can ground it in our survivors' experiences, talking about it from our perspective, sharing it in ways that sometimes people who are in clinics or case managers, who maybe don't know someone living with HIV to be able to have close and really intimate conversations with, maybe haven't heard. And so we're here today to share our perspectives with you from that point of view. We'll have some practical guidance and some safety considerations around disclosure. We'll be able to talk about our PWN Day of Action, which was an incredibly powerful call to action on October 1st that PWN has held for the last 15 years now to honor and lift up our members and also women, cisgender and transgender, gender diverse folks and transgender folks who have lost their lives due to violence from disclosing their status. We will have lots of knowledge, tools, strategies, tips, tricks, and we'll share them with everyone when we are done with our webinar. So if we drop something in the chat and you didn't get a chance to grab it, or you want to go back, we will send an email out to everyone who registered with the recording and the slides and everything that we share during this conversation. And mostly we want to have you feel encouraged to talk about violence, both state-sanctioned violence, intimate partner violence, with the people that you know in your life who are living with HIV, because so often it is easy to have it be a checklist or something that we are interviewed about, but not as often that we have a chance to share our personal perspectives. And we want to help everyone see that this is a complicated issue with some complicated solutions and suggestions, but that mostly it is just critical for us to be able to talk about this. Again, as I mentioned, October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we are so proud to partner once again with the National Network to End Domestic Violence to honor this month, as well as to lift up the Day of Action that PWN has celebrated. With that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it to Mary Jane to go ahead and tell you a little bit about who PWN is, just in case you have folks who are interested in joining as members or as allies. Mary Jane, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Barb. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Jane, but I go by MJ. I'm a co-chair for Colorado PWN or the chapter in Colorado. I'm an advocate with the National HIV and AIDS Housing Coalition. A 2-year intern. This was my second internship. And I'm also a recent graduate of Emerge National. Emerge National is an organization that trains Democratic women to run for office, and I hope to do so one day. So I'm gonna tell you, PWN has meant so much to me in the last 8 years. I've been with PWN. I found out I was living with HIV in 2011. I found PWN about 6 years later, after 6 years of depression and bouncing back and forth through my drug of choice. And PWN has always stuck behind me. And even when I was still in active use, they still stuck behind me. And in the last 8 years, I found recovery 5 years ago. I just celebrated 5 years. And I really do attribute a lot of that to PWN and how they supported me over the years. We are an amazing organization that supports our women no matter where we are, no matter where we are in life, what we're going through, whether it be personal or whether it be just needing support for what's going on right now in this crazy world. But I just want to let y'all know PWN is a national organization. We're led by and for cis and trans women, gender diverse and transgender people living with HIV. We advocate for programs and policies that impact our lives. PWN knows that HIV highlights racial and gender injustices, so therefore we lift up these communities in our leadership, which is something else that's beautiful about PWN is no matter where you start in this organization, you can always become a leader. If we do talk about allies, and allies do support, but in order to be a leader in the organization, you have to be living with HIV. So if you know anybody who is and you'd like to send them our way, we'd love to have them. And let me see, next slide. Oh, it's already up. Sorry about that. So in 2008, PWN was founded by a diverse group of cis and transgender women and transgender people. We have thousands of members across the United States and allies. If you would like to join PWN, like I said before, Barb will drop the link in the chat. We have 8 chapters in 7 states. We including Colorado, of course, New York, South Carolina, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, both the greater Houston and the Dallas-Fort Worth, and Pennsylvania. We are led by a membership of I'm sorry, led by our membership for our membership, and we envision a world where trans and cisgender women, gender diverse and transgender people living with HIV can live long, healthy, and dignified lives, free from stigma and discrimination. That's what we do. I'll pass it back to Barb.
Thank you, Mary Jane. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit just to frame why talking about intimate partner violence is one piece of what we do at PWN. We have this expansive policy agenda that drives every piece of our work. And as Mary Jane said, we are led by and for women living with HIV. So these policies have been ones that have been lifted up by our members as being the most critical pieces that impact their lives. And we'll talk a bunch about how this all overlaps and intersects today. But primarily, we lift up reproductive rights, including abortion access. And we very intentionally say abortion because we know that it is so critical to destigmatize that word, and gender affirming care as well. We work to end criminalization of people living with HIV. If you have not heard about criminalization of people living with HIV, it is important to you. You just don't know it yet. We'll talk a little bit about it today. And then I invite you to a number of other webinars that we have where we talk about why specifically targeting people who know that they're living with HIV is problematic, both from a public health perspective, but also from a personal and diminishing stigma perspective as well. We are always so critically supportive of universal comprehensive health care for all. In our current administration, with this current shutdown, fighting over premiums and people's access to health care, we know that for people living with HIV, if they don't have access to quality, educated, informed, stigma-free health care, we do not do well. And so it's easy to say HIV, people live long and healthy lives. However, that does not mean that people are able to access care and do well if they aren't able to afford care. That's so important. And then finally, we invest in healthcare access and social support services for our community and our partnership with the National Network to End Domestic Violence, as well as so many of our other community partners lift up this piece of our work. PWN starts all of our trainings with an intentional leaning in. We call them our PWN affirming statements. And I'm not going to read them, but I do just want to lift up that this is about centering the lived experience of people living with HIV, power, wisdom, and leadership of our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, Latina community of color members who are leading us. We commit to actively listening, honoring each other's diverse identities, and challenging all forms of anti-Blackness and racism in real time. This is a critical piece of our work, and we continue to lift it up. And we lift up our affirming statements so that people know that PWN is committed to this work. We also go ahead and we start all of our trainings with affirming statements around pronouns. We do this intentionally because we know that naming using our pronouns and respecting each other's pronouns is a radical act in today's world, given the executive orders January 20th that removed the ability to require pronouns in people's email signatures and in introductions, at the federal level has demonstrated this sliding back. And so we lean in and lift up the importance of pronouns, knowing that we encourage people to introduce themselves with their name, their pronouns, and if they have an affirming statement that they like to share about themselves, to feel free to do that as well. I'll often say I'm Barb Cardell. I use they, them pronouns. I am a subject matter expert about living with HIV. However, sometimes people choose not to introduce themselves with pronouns. We are okay with that, but we do require in our spaces that if somebody has shared their pronouns, that you respect them. And again, this is about providing community safety for all of our organizations. So we like to just use those as a way to introduce ourselves and the commitment that we have to both racial and gender justice. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass to Nikayla. And Nikayla, if you want to introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about our statement on disclosure, that would be lovely. And welcome, Nikayla. It's good to see you. And Nikayla, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, not to
Oh my God.
worry, not to worry. It's a technology day for all of us. So now we can hear you. Welcome. It's good to
Oh,
see you.
you're good to see you all too. Um, Hi everyone. I'm Nikayla Penn. I'm located here in Atlanta, Georgia. My pronouns are she and her. Um, right now I'm going to read the PWN USA Statement on Disclosure and Leadership. Yeah,
And
excuse me with my
Nick,
highlights.
yeah, Nikayla,
Mhm.
it looks like I just got your message that you are missing your copy of the slides to be able to follow along with the notes. Do you want me to
Yeah.
do this one and then you can talk about the framing conversation next?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So we like to share PWN's statement on disclosure and leadership. If you want to look at it, we'll go ahead and put the link in the chat. But as we have talked about earlier, when we talk about disclosure, it is complicated, especially for people living with HIV. It is so easy to say, you should just tell everyone your status. And Mary Jane and Nikayla and I will actually tell you a little bit about how we did disclose our status, maybe perhaps overly sharing in the early days, because that's what we felt like we were supposed to do. PWN realizes that this is safe for some people and not safe for others. And so rather than telling people that they need to that they need to disclose to be considered as a leader within PWN, we have this statement that says that we accept everyone as a leader, whether they are comfortable disclosing or sharing their status or whether they are not. And we do that intentionally, knowing that the only person who can determine what is safe for them is the person who's living with HIV. And so we just wanted to demonstrate that we've had this statement up on our website since 2014, lifting up the complicated ways that people often have to make decisions about disclosure. And then, Nikayla, I'm going to go ahead and pass to you for framing our conversation.
Okay, so framing our conversation about violence against people living with HIV, political violence. And I want to also say, don't forget to vote because in this time, some crazy times, and we all need to think about voting. Violence in relationships, both intimate, family, and community, emotional, sexual, or physical, judgment, stigma, and abuse in peer and sponsorship programs, elder abuse, isolation, and misgendering.
Thank you for that, Nikayla. So when we were
Thank you.
thinking about our conversation today, Nikayla and Mary Jane and I really were thinking about where violence against people living with HIV shows up, and it's easy to focus, and it's important to focus on domestic violence. And Ashley's going to share statistics and some facts that are pretty horrifying, actually, about the impact of violence on people living with HIV. But we also want to lift up, as we said, given this current administration and the attacks on HIV prevention and care, that this feels like systemic violence as well. The laws that target us for knowledge of our HIV status, like HIV criminalization laws, are violence also. And so we wanted to just go ahead and sort of have this as a way where we can list out all of the things that we wanted to make sure people were thinking about. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it to Ashley to go ahead and ground us in some of the facts, statistics, and information about this, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Barb. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Sly. I'm the Director of Positively Safe at the National Network to End Domestic Violence. My pronouns are she, her. I live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Cusco and Siwi people outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So a little bit about NNEDV. We are a social change organization dedicated to creating a social, political, and economic environment in which domestic violence no longer exists. We were originally formed in 1990 by state coalitions as a public policy organization to respond to domestic violence at the federal policy level. So including the Violence Against Women Act and the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. And then we were incorporated in 1995 officially as NNEDV. Next slide, please. So for 35 years, we have represented the 56 state and territorial domestic violence coalitions at the national level. Our members, who are the coalitions, they are heavily involved in our policy work. They come to Washington, D.C. every year to participate in our joint advocacy days, which are held in collaboration and cooperation with the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence. So you can see how this kind of looks. Our state and territorial coalitions, they're members of the local programs. So that's how we're all connected. Next slide. And since our inception, NNEDV's projects have grown to include addressing technology abuse, confidentiality, housing, capacity building, HIV, and a whole lot more. NNEDV is also a member of the Global Network of Women's Shelters and really tries to work globally to coordinate efforts to address domestic and sexual violence. Next slide. NNEDV's Positively Safe team, so it's one of the teams that I lead, focuses on the intersection of domestic violence and HIV, and was founded in 2010 with a small grant from the MAC AIDS Fund. With this, we created the Domestic Violence and HIV Advisory Committee, which included domestic violence advocates, HIV service providers, and survivors living with HIV. The Positive Women's Network was one of those committee members. This committee informed the work of Positively Safe and led to the development of the first DV and HIV training curriculum and the beginning of the Positively Safe Toolkit. Since then, we have received funding from the Office on Violence Against Women, Gilead Sciences, ViiV Healthcare, Janssen, and the Caring Foundation. The Positively Safe project provides training and technical assistance. We develop and disseminate resources. We co-host a podcast called Expanding the Continuum and conduct listening sessions with survivors. All of this is focused on the intersection and available for really any organization that's supporting survivors of domestic violence who are living with HIV or those who would benefit from HIV preventative care. So domestic violence organizations, HIV community-based organizations, housing organizations, multi-service organizations, anyone that could fall within this realm. Next slide. So intimate partner violence, which can also be called domestic violence, dating violence, even family violence, just depending on where you live and context, is a pattern of power and control a person uses to exert that control over their partner. It is not a one-time occurrence, but a continuous cycle of controlling tactics. And these tactics, though they may vary, are constantly at play. The victim's survivor is likely to be subjected to multiple tactics of power and control at any given time. IPV is a pervasive issue that really transcends race, socioeconomic status, education level, gender identity, sexual orientation. It can really impact anyone. It impacts folks across age groups. For instance, a 14-year-old might suffer abuse from a partner and receive numerous threatening messages daily. Conversely, a 75-year-old individual might be subjected to gaslighting into believing like they may have dementia, with constant remarks such as like, you've misplaced your keys again, or you keep leaving the water on, when really in reality, their partner is manipulating their environment or moving or turning on things, covertly. So each of these instances, constitute a form of control and psychological manipulation. So understanding the universality is key to fostering empathy and a deeper understanding of the issues. Next slide. So for many years, folks talked about domestic violence more in like the terms of a cycle of violence, which included a period of tension building, an explosion, and then a honeymoon phase, with the cycle repeating. However, it really never fully captured the entire picture. It wasn't always the reality for many victims. We know that violence isn't always cyclical, and often there are various underlying tactics of power and control. So this led to the creation of the Power and Control Wheel that was developed by the Domestic Violence Intervention Programs in Duluth, Minnesota, in partnership with survivors. And it really aimed to illustrate how domestic violence manifests and how it can vary by survivors. So looking at the wheel that represents the power and control used by abusive partners, and moving outward, the spokes illustrates the specific tactics of power and control, each falling into different categories, such as using intimidation or economic abuse. And the outermost part of the wheel is that sexual and physical violence, kind of the factor that holds everything together and evokes the most fear there. Excuse me. So there are a few areas here that are not highlighted on the wheel, but I want to touch on them because I do think they're important to the conversation and more broadly intimate partner violence and to what we'll be talking about today. So we are going to talk about tech facilitated abuse, medical abuse, and reproductive coercion briefly. So let's go to the next slide. So like I said, tactics related to technology, those are not included on that wheel, but they're important to highlight because, those are impacting so many facets of our lives, and tech facilitated abuse is changing daily. Someone doesn't need to be a computer expert to misuse technology. Abusive partners have monitored tech use for years, right? It could be as simple as tracking the miles on a car or checking outgoing and incoming calls on a phone bill. Now things are just more advanced, right? They might use GPS tracking and turn on location sharing without the survivor knowing, or they could have the survivor's passwords and passcodes to access devices and accounts, including their email, social media, and bank accounts. But there are many other tools and tactics that abusive partners have used, right? Including spyware and nanny cams, interconnected home like tech hubs, and non-consensual image sharing. Survivors might accidentally install spyware on their phone or computer after clicking something that seems completely harmless, right? Like an e-card. But instead, after they've clicked it, it secretly downloads a program directly to their device. And, with the rise of these sophisticated phishing emails, right? We all get these like every day. It seems like there's more and more of them. It's completely possible for someone to click on a link or an attachment that allows someone to steal passwords or certain account information, right? And these setups can be easily created by an abusive partner who has those necessary skills. And then we have to consider data and how it's shared, especially for survivors. Thinking about cookies and geolocation that's embedded in images that you're sharing on social media. And with how easy it is to screenshot and copy things today, like if you're deleting it from the internet, is it really being deleted? And this all keeps changing, right? Technology is always evolving, and people are finding new ways to manipulate it, whether through its AI, artificial intelligence, or connectivity of our vehicles, right? For example, with my car, I can open an app and see its last location, how fast it was driven, how much gas is in the tank, and so much more. So we constantly have to be aware of all of these changes and adapting in a positive way. Next slide. So technology is not all doom and gloom, right? It does have many benefits, and it can be a great tool for survivors. End-to-end encrypted messaging. So programs like WhatsApp is a great one that most people know about, can allow survivors to have private conversations with family and friends, even advocates at domestic violence programs. Social media is still a good tool to stay connected with family and friends. And survivors can work with advocates to adjust those privacy settings to protect themselves. And while smart devices can be misused, right, like, doorbells and cameras, they can also be safety tools. And NEDV has a great partnership with Amazon to distribute Ring doorbells to survivors across the country. So they do have a bit, of safety. They feel a little more safer going to their homes. There are programs that have been set up. So the Safe Connections Act, which permits survivors to separate from a plan, cell phone plan with their abusive partner without incurring a fee from the service provider. So there are positive things out there for survivor tech usage. And then I always like to remind folks, survivors, us, everyone, just reminding folks about the importance of passwords and making sure that we're keeping them nice and strong and changing them regularly. Next slide, please. And technology also plays a crucial role in enhancing medical access, right? Individuals can now conveniently obtain healthcare services from their homes through telehealth, medications delivered directly to them. We are able to request and view and download medical information without visiting medical facilities. We can communicate with healthcare professionals remotely. Some individuals are also interested in monitoring their health, right? However, there have been concerns regarding data privacy and health information. Some applications are not encrypted, right? So that kind of leaves the information vulnerable to unauthorized access. So means it's whoever kind of operates the app might have a backdoor key to see your information. But if it is end-to-end encrypted, that means they can't. It is really just essential that, ensuring that any kind of health tracking application that we're using is encrypted then. So one that we know of, like the Yuki app, that serves as really an excellent example. Their website pretty explicitly states, we believe that privacy, freedom of speech, and information and bodily autonomy are human rights, not paid features. That's why Yuki is 100% free and offers a range of security features to keep your data safe. This is just one example, right? They very clearly state, that they protect your information. They, here's kind of what they offer you. There are obviously other options out there, but it's important that, you understand where your information is going before we put it into different programs. Next slide. So medical care and access represents another area in which survivors may encounter tactics of control, potentially leading to adverse health outcomes. Survivors frequently experience higher incidence of strokes, heart attacks, irritable bowel syndrome, GERD, asthma, cervical cancer, breast cancer, various other health conditions there. So medical abuse is really one to be considering for survivors. Next slide, please. And tactics of medical abuse can include not allowing access to any medical providers or accompanying them to all of their appointments to control, really what is said, canceling appointments without informing the survivor, destroying, tampering with, or disposing of medications, even using the survivor's medication so that they don't have enough for themselves, possibly prohibiting access to medical information or even providing inaccurate medical information, threatening to cancel insurance, following through on canceling insurance. Right, these are merely a few tactics that have been experienced by survivors. However, really, they can result in both short-term and long-term health consequences for folks. Next slide. And related to medical abuse is reproductive coercion, right? Where the partner uses a pattern of abusive behaviors to maintain control of the reproductive health and choices of their partner, right? They lack any autonomy over reproductive choices, and the like broader medical abuse can experience those adverse health outcomes. Next slide, please. So for survivors, this may look like being pressured or forced to engage in sexual activity, and this could be with their partner or with other people. Survivors may also be prohibited from using contraception, or their partner may destroy contraception, even forcibly removing if the survivor has an IUD. Abusive partners may engage in stealthing, which is intentionally removing the condom during sex without their partner knowing. Survivors may also experience forced pregnancy. In the United States, homicide is the leading cause of death for pregnant women. And abusive partners may also force their partner to have an abortion or control abortion-related decisions. Survivors also may have limited access to reproductive health care, just like in general medical abuse that we saw. So one aspect covered in our training sessions with domestic violence organizations is really this recognition of the limited access to medical care that's experienced by many survivors. Consequently, a survivor may not have undergone a pap smear in 8 years, or they may be interested in accessing PrEP to regain some control over their sexual health. And we really want advocates to be comfortable having those kinds of conversations so survivors are, can make those decisions again. They feel like they have autonomy over their body, and, whatever those medical decisions that they want to make, they can make them and feel fully informed. Next slide, please. And this is all really important, right? Talking about medical abuse and reproductive coercion, because folks, and particularly women, are experiencing intimate partner violence. They have a 4 times greater chance of acquiring STIs, including HIV, than women who are not experiencing domestic violence, right? And 55% of women living with HIV have experienced intimate partner violence. I think that number is actually higher based on conversations that I've had over the years and working with survivors and programs. I've heard programs tell me 80% of the women in their programs have experienced domestic violence at least once in their lifetime. So these numbers are staggering. In 2015, the US Transgender Survey found that 54% of folks who identify as transgender or non-binary have experienced violence from an intimate partner at least once in their lifetime. So partnerships between domestic violence and HIV organizations are really essential for survivor health and safety and benefit the entire community. So this is why we're here, and why NNEDV's partnership with PWN has been really a critical component of the work for so long. Next slide, please. So to support discussions on the intersection of domestic violence and HIV, we created our HIV Power and Control Wheel. Over the years, many survivors living with HIV have shared the tactics of abuse that they have faced. And although this wheel does not include every HIV-related tactic that a survivor may encounter, we really hoped that it provided a helpful starting point for conversation. So you'll see that it includes many of the medical abuse components that were talked about previously there, and it includes some of the technology abuse pieces that I highlighted earlier. And then it includes some other pieces around like isolation, so threatening to tell, to reveal the status, the victim's status, not allowing them to attend support groups, things like that. So they're very specific there. But again, it doesn't include everything that someone might experience. Next slide. And for survivors who are living with HIV, they may also experience abuse that is connected to disclosure. And this is why we wanted to work with PWN on this disclosure guide that we're going to talk about. 45% of women living with HIV reported experiencing emotional, physical, or sexual abuse at some time after their diagnosis. Another study found that 24% of women living with HIV experienced physical abuse after disclosure, and 45% feared such a reaction. So if and when a survivor decides to disclose, we really want to ensure that autonomy and safety are central to the conversation that advocates are having, right? Survivors should lead the conversation in this as they do safety planning. We're going to dive much deeper into this guide soon. I apologize, my son is home and has to come in and say hi to me. Apologies. Next slide, please. It was bound to happen at some point. So kind of related to disclosure, and I think has to be kind of brought up in the full context of thinking about domestic violence and working with folks around this is survivor safety. And survivors often face these questions of, why don't you just leave? Which really is the most dangerous time for survivors, because an abusive partner feels their control slipping and they may escalate their tactics. So 75% of domestic violence homicides occur at the point of separation, and the presence of a firearm increases the chance of homicide by 1,000%. But so often there's various reasons at play for why leaving isn't as simple as it sounds, right? They may lack the financial means, they may have ruined credit or no employment. There might be various other financial barriers they're experiencing. They may have religious beliefs that just don't allow for leaving a marriage. The experiences of trauma can impact our fight or flight responses and kind of leave you just frozen. Survivors might feel like a failure, right? A failure for not keeping the relationship, a failure as a parent. And survivors often have a fear of separation violence, of child abuse, a fear of custody fights, fear of death, a fear of calling the police. They might also lack support from family and friends. And systemically, there are barriers, right? Lack of affordable housing, the immigration process, if they're undocumented, systemic discrimination within medical institutions and other public institutions, right? There are various other barriers that come to play there. So survivors are facing really an increased potential for violence, homelessness, poverty, potential loss of their children, and stigma when leaving. So none of this really makes that decision to leave easy, let alone if you have to add on the possibility of having to disclose your status, or the stigma of living with HIV and going to, a shelter. What does that add to the complexity of everything that someone might be experiencing there? Next slide. And yes, Meta, sorry, I saw your comment there. Yeah, so the FBI data, let me see if I can try to explain this. The Violence Policy Center has released their report When Men Murder Women for the past 20 or so years. And in, I don't know, 5 years or so ago, they changed how they gathered their data. So if you go and look at their reports, the past few have not recorded, have not included their state rankings. Usually they will include a ranking of the states with the highest number of murders of women per capita. And they have not been able to include that because the FBI has changed their way they've gathered their data. But because of how the relationship categories are defined, ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, they're not included in that intimate acquaintance category analysis. So they can't capture that. So they end up falling under this like other bucket. So they would fall under the someone that the survivor knew or the victim knew, but would not fall into that 57.1% that were wives, common law wives, ex-wives, or girlfriends. So that number is likely higher, right? We just don't know how much higher based on what we do know, from the data. But great question. Thank you, Meta. So like I was mentioning on the last slide, the violence that survivors experience really extends beyond intimate partner violence. Survivors are frequently impacted by systemic violence. Marissa Alexander was given a mandatory minimum for firing a warning shot near her ex when she felt her life was in danger. Brescia Meadows, after years of physical and sexual abuse by her father, she killed him and then was given a year in juvenile detention and 6 months confined in a mental health facility. Marcella Rodriguez, who was turned over to Immigration Customs Enforcement for deportation after she called for help, right? These are just a handful of survivors who have experienced domestic and sexual violence, and the system didn't help them. There are hundreds more stories of women who are still incarcerated for trying to protect themselves and their children. So the systems haven't always served survivors well. Next slide, please. And as part of our work with PWN, NNADV hosted listening sessions with Black women survivors of domestic violence who are living with HIV over the last 2 years. We wanted to hear how it was accessing support through domestic violence programs and HIV organizations and other systems. And they shared with us all about how the systems have failed them, right? So these are just a few of the quotes that came from them. He had busted my head a couple of times, but this last time I fought back. I was fighting him and I busted his head and ran when the police and ambulance came. But when the police caught me, they sent me to the ER. I got stitches and was sent to jail for 3 years and was sent to therapy. He didn't get arrested that night, and I got arrested, served time, ended up having to go back to waitressing, starting my life all over again. So that support is very important. I didn't have the support from the officers. I didn't have the support from the courts until I was able to provide proof, but by character references that he had a violent history. Now our HIV status is at stake because they could be coming to arrest the person that's hurting me, but only you got to say, well, she's HIV positive and she ain't telling me. Then the tables turn around. Next slide. So part of that systemic violence comes from HIV criminalization. And that's such a critical piece to the conversation on domestic violence and disclosure. Um, Domestic violence advocates know that abusive partners will find any way to maintain control, including exploiting laws and subpoenaing, court ordering records, anything that they can do. The Center for HIV Law and Policy has some helpful information about HIV criminalization across the country. They do a lot of national and state advocacy to modernize and improve laws to end HIV criminalization through their Positive Justice Project. PWN does amazing work to end HIV criminalization. We actually have a podcast episode talking about HIV criminalization with PWN. But it's really important work that must be done and has to be done in collaboration with domestic violence advocates. This is such a great area for DV advocates at the local level, at the state level, to be collaborating with PWN and with other HIV advocates in the state to modernize, overturn these laws. I'm sure there are questions, but I'm going to turn it back over to Barb at this point, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have here.
Actually, before we move along, we had somebody who asked if you could talk a little bit about safety planning. You talked a lot about the cautions and the need for it, and somebody asked if you could just introduce or talk a little bit more about what a safety plan could look like, especially for a person living with HIV.
Sure. So safety planning in general is very much led by the survivor. What do they need in that moment in time? It's going to be very specific to, what's happening in their life. Are they deciding to stay? Are they deciding to leave? Because that's going to look very different. And if they have left, are they, 6 months after they left, or is it immediately in that moment of kind of crisis? So that's going to be important though. So for someone who might still be with their partner, things you might consider are like, if you have maybe a 90-day supply of medication, separating supplies. So keeping a 30-day supply hidden someplace else in case your partner disposes of some of your medication, you have something that's stockpiled, or if you need to flee, you have something you can grab immediately and leave with. For survivors, maybe considering where your medication is picked up, right? My husband can go to the pharmacy and pick up my medication, right? No questions asked. They just ask date of birth. He knows my date of birth, obviously. He knows where we live, but it might be necessary for a survivor to change where they get their prescription at. Or they might want to tell the pharmacy, have a note put in their file, like this person is the only person that's allowed to pick up their medications. So things like that might be important to consider. Who is, if they go to a specific clinic and their partner goes to the same clinic, do they, figure out how to make sure that they're not going at the same time? Or do they need to find a new, place to be seen, a new doctor, physician to be seen? So thinking about those kinds of things can be helpful. And then for survivors that might be accessing PrEP. I worked with a survivor who kept her PrEP in a vitamin bottle, and her partner never said anything to her about it. So there's lots of different kind of things to think about. I think it's just really important to consider like what's most pressing for the survivor, right? Their most pressing need might be the safety of their children. So maybe it's, I need to make sure that my kids are not picked up from school, or I have a safety word if I have to call the school, or, things like that might be in play. But obviously, the thing I always tell folks is like, just listen to the survivor. What do they need right then and there? What do they want? That's going to be a key to the safety plan. And obviously always just, reviewing it regularly, checking in, just saying like, do we need to change anything? How do you feel about this? Do we need to add anything? I think that's just important as well. But I'm always happy to chat with folks if people want to, send me a message, give me a call, whatever y'all need.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate that. So part of what we've been talking about today is framing why it is so critical to talk to people who are living with HIV, especially cisgender, transgender women, gender diverse and transgender folks, about both the capacity to have intimate partner violence in their situations, but also to talk about disclosure in a way that is really helpful. If you are in a clinic or a case manager or a medical provider or a friend of someone who's living with HIV, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to, if you only check out one link in our entire conversation, please go ahead and click on the link around the HIV criminalizing laws. This is something that is so important and not a lot of people know about it. And these are laws that are in place that target people either with sentence enhancements. And so in some cases, they move a misdemeanor to a felony charge, or they have a sentence enhancement, which means that it is 3 times the normal sentencing, standard sentencing for someone who is living with HIV. Or it could actually be that it is a mandatory testing or loss of some other right to bodily autonomy and self-determination. So knowing the HIV criminalization laws in your state are really critical to both be supportive, as well as if you are living with HIV, to be safe, because unfortunately these laws are utilized often. They're utilized punitively, and they do not only need to result when transmission has occurred or some other crime has happened. They are used often to threaten folks and to get you to behave or follow along if you are picked up by the police. So these are terrible. These are terrible. And they're actually, when we talked earlier about systemic violence, these laws are violence against people living with HIV within our systems, within our government. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is purely because you know your status. And so when we talk about public health and we talk about ending the HIV epidemic, and we talk about all of the work that we've done so hard for 40 plus years to address HIV transmissions and to ensure people can live long and healthy lives, these laws are directly contradicted. They tell people, well, you can't get in trouble with the law if you don't actually know your status, which means that you also aren't in medical care, you aren't connected perhaps to a case manager or some other support system, and you're not on medication. And so it is completely backwards, upside down world that this makes any sense at all. But it's most important for you to know, as someone who is in the life of someone living with HIV, or perhaps living with HIV yourself, that these laws exist and they are being used to charge people. So let's talk about the second part. We have this disclosure guidance that PWN actually drafted, and it started off, and it was really a wonderful conversation. As we've mentioned, PWN has been in a lengthy partnership with the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and we were able to gather stories from our members about their personal experiences, to share some blogs and some poetry that people wrote, really to lean in and lift up the voices of people who are most impacted. We set out to actually kind of help draft a disclosure guidance for providers of intimate partner violence interventions and support services for people living with HIV. And we realized actually that we kind of wanted to talk about disclosure, and we wanted to talk about how people could support folks living with HIV, rather than just sort of say, here's how you guide someone to disclose their status to an intimate partner, perhaps someone who's been violent. And so we ended up with this beautiful, beautiful guidance that we'll go ahead and share the link to, that was this collaboration. It was written by 7 of our PWN members who have lived experience both with HIV and intimate partner violence. And we were able to develop some talking points and some suggestions. And we realized after we wrote it that what we had developed was not just for providers or case managers, but it actually kind of worked as a really good disclosure guidance for our community, for our allies, for the people that love us, for our families, for our churches. And so we want to just go ahead and put that here and invite you to take a look at it and to share widely, because this is so important. And again, as we talk about violence, just want to lift up that we're talking not just about relationship violence, but we are talking about structural violence, we're talking about barriers to care, and we're talking about systemic violence. And those are all so important when we talk about how people living with HIV move through the world. Here's a little bit of a taste of what it looks like, as well as a QR code if the link doesn't work there and you're a better QR code person. There is a QR code there. And again, like we said, we talk about why it's so important, and then we give some actual really strategic steps for people to follow as they're going along. But here's the part of the webinar that I am so looking forward to. We have Mary Jane and Nikayla, who have joined us and helped do some of our introduction at the early part of our webinar. And Mary Jane and Nikayla and I helped to write the guidance. And so what we want to do now is we actually want to go ahead and sort of share a little bit about why we thought this guidance was so important, a little bit of our own stories, and are always happy to share any or answer any questions that you might have. Or if you have questions that you want to ask Ashley, let's go ahead and just start populating those in the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and invite up. I got Nikayla and Mary Jane here. Welcome you to. Thank you again so much for helping us write this guidance. I am proud of many things that we've done at PWN. This is one of them. And I am so grateful to have been able to partner with both of you on it. Let's see. Whoops, sorry. I realize I'm a little bit behind. I'm going to go ahead. Here's the disclosure guidance with the QR code. And I'm going to leave that up while we do our panel, just so that if people want to use the QR code, they can go ahead and do it. So Mary Jane and Nikayla, MJ, do you mind if I go to you first?
Sure. Don't mind a bit.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead? You introduced yourself at the beginning, but that seems like that was perhaps a lifetime ago in webinar times. Do you mind introducing yourself again and share as much or as little of your story around living with HIV and how intimate partner violence has impacted your life with the audience, and share as much or as little as you feel comfortable, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barb. So I'm MJ. I'm a co-chair for Colorado PWN. I am a 2-year intern with the National HIV and AIDS Housing Coalition. And I am a recent graduate of Emerge National. I'm looking forward to someday running for office and trying to get on the inside of helping us all. So for me, when I found out I was living with HIV, I had been an over-the-road truck driver for 17 years. So unbeknownst to me, I had no idea what was happening. I just knew that I was getting sick and getting sicker. After about 4 years of putting up with this, all these different colds and flus and rashes and fevers and not knowing what was happening, but I knew I had to keep working. So I finally, after I would say about 4 years of this, I decided to take a leave of absence, and I stayed in Denver for, my parents picked me up in Nebraska, and I came back to Denver and I went to see a doctor, and I found out I was living with HIV. I thought that was the worst day of my life. I really did. And I say did. But after all these years and the support that I've received, I realized that it was probably the best thing that happened to me. Mainly because I've educated myself. I spent 6 years in depression, but believe me, I looked up every article and everything I could on HIV, trying to educate myself. That's where this is so important to me, because I know that intimate violence is so important, and I know that we have to protect ourselves, and along with that, help those of us that are being affected by it. I believe that in my life, I can say that most of mine has been internalized. So I don't know if you can understand that, but as an over-the-road truck driver and somebody that had a very flirtatious, active, sexually, all of the above life, when I found out I was living with HIV, I kind of shut all that off. I've had internalized stigma with dating, with sex, but all of this comes down to the fact that I had a hard time in the beginning not telling everybody. And I don't know if you understand that, but I felt like in the beginning I had to tell everyone. And I did. I told every single one of my family members one by one. I told my doctors when I would go in for something else, I would tell a doctor in rural Colorado when I mentioned that earlier in the chat that I went to a doctor probably still with I was diagnosed with AIDS in the beginning also, so I left that out. But when I was very ill and I went to Delta Memorial Hospital and went to see a doctor in the emergency room, and I told the doctor I'm living with HIV, he took 2 steps backwards. So that to me is violence. That felt very intimate, right? Because I wanted my doctor to say, well, that's okay. Let's see what's going on with you, right? This may not have nothing to do with your HIV. Nothing of the sort. 2 steps backwards. I said, you can leave now. I'd like to see another doctor. And that's how I handle that. So I just think that intimate violence can be different for everybody. I've never had an incident where I felt like a partner was going to tell, but the reason I haven't dated and the reason I haven't is that internal stigma that if I don't tell, then I could get in trouble. Um, I don't I don't tell everybody now. I live loud and proud, right? Everybody knows I'm living with HIV, except for maybe potential partners. So that's where I internalize that, and I have trouble because I'm afraid that sure they'll say they understand the science, blah blah blah, U equals U, listen to me, but then days later they're like, I don't know if I believe all that, and then there's where that internal or where that violence comes from is because if they can't believe in the science, then how can we date them? So that's also internal, or that's also violence. So that's yeah. Thank you, and I'll let you answer. Sorry for taking so much time. So much
Thank
goes
you.
on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Mary Jane. And I, noticed that when you were talking about, sharing, telling everyone that you were living with HIV early on, both Nikayla and I sort of nodded along, because it's something that we're told that we're supposed to do. And we already have so much stigma and shame about living with HIV that we want to do it right. We want to be good. And finally someone shared with me that I only actually needed to share my HIV status with people when their knowing was going to help me. And I think that that's an interesting way to look at it. And especially again, of course, we've got the U equals U, the undetectable is unable to transmit HIV, and so much science around this. And that's a whole nother webinar. But right now, what we're really leaning into is how hard it is and how it feels when we tell ourselves we have to disclose and maybe perhaps overshare our status. So thank you for that, Mary Jane. Nikayla, I'm going to go ahead and go to you and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself again and share as much or as little as you would like to about your personal journey with HIV and to intimate partner violence.
Okay. Well, good evening again, everyone. My name is Nikayla Penn. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I still live here. I am also a Black Southern trans woman who has experienced basically all of my relationships have been IPV. Um, I'm also a victim of intergenerational IPV. If you don't understand what I mean by that, I've seen violence like that growing up. So it carried on. I didn't realize until recently when I got out of a relationship over 10 years ago that all of my relationships had been mentally, physically, and verbally abusive. Um, as a Black trans woman, I didn't think about it like that at the time. I kept it quiet because of the way I was raised about not sharing what go on in your house. Um, the last relationship I started sharing with two of my good girlfriends who happen to be trans, and one of them had experienced the same thing before in the past. Um, as the slides were going, I took a few notes that I wanted to bring up that was a part of my experience. As when you talk about the systematic failure, I remember calling the police. The police came and didn't do anything. I don't know whether they knew I was trans or not. Um, and all I could do was just pray to get out of it. Um, when you think about a safety plan, my safety plan was talking to my therapist. Um, I had also had a social worker. They was telling me where to go to get help. I did call to get a restraining order that I could get done for free. Um, I remember being on the Zoom call with the lawyer along with other women who had been in my situation. I said that I didn't know where the person was because out of fear of my life, because I knew if they would bring the um, restraining order, that they would have to come to my house. And there was no other way that there could be done was um, that was the only way that it could be done in order to get him out of my life and out my house. And I was like, oh my God. I believe that's what happened to some of the other women because we was all over there just crying together. Um, the relations I had been in, it was about power and control. You know, I had been with men. I didn't think about it at the time. They had drug, alcohol problems, had been in and out of prison. Um, and so they manipulated me in a lot of ways. I had been, sexually abused before. Um, and so I didn't tell my doctor. You know, a lot of times, even the medical profession can be judgmental or they just don't know how to help. I was just scared. It's already scared. It takes a long time for a trans person to even find a doctor that you're comfortable with. And even when you're comfortable with a doctor, sometimes you still don't tell them everything. And I do remember one time I was just thinking that my doctor asked me, was I safe? You know, it's a lot of times when medical professions ask you that, I think that they should clarify and go a little bit deeper as to, not just housing, but, is anyone in your home harming you or something like that, I, the one, had to started to make the changes to talking to um, my therapist about it. I felt like that was a more safer place. Um, I can tell you all some of the violence that I had experienced of having a knife put through my throat to get money for drugs. My last boyfriend, I went to the store and when I got home, we was putting up the groceries and I was moving a little slow. He was on top of me, put his stuff in the freezer, and he took a hard piece of meat, frozen meat out the refrigerator, hit me in my head. He cooked food for us one time and I wasn't ready to eat, and he slapped me and threw the food in my face. Um, he confused me emotionally by being caring about my HIV status, but then again also told me I was cursed because I had HIV. When it comes to the disclosure part, uh, I had disclosed to him a long time ago before we even became intimate or even being in an intimate relationship, and he seemed, cool about it. Um, for me, when you talk about disclosure, I always want to disclose first before even thinking about getting involved in a relationship. Um, it's been a little over 2 years now. So, and I'm currently in a much better relationship. And um, when this young man approached me about dating with me, I held him off for over a month. And I just finally, like, I told him one thing, that I was transgender and that I was positive. And the one thing he said to me, "Oh, okay, you know, what's next?" Okay, I'm cool with it. He said that he was a little upset for a second because I didn't tell him in the beginning, but we had met and he seemed interested. I gave him my phone number. It didn't go any further. And I had to explain to him, everybody doesn't tell everything about the person when they first meet them. I'll say at least I don't. So he understood that. Yeah. And when MJ was talking about when she first, found out, when I first found out too, which was about 23 years ago, I was like, started telling people myself who I felt was close to me. And then I realized over the years as meeting other people, um, let me just take it back a little bit. When I found out, I told a good close friend of mine, um, yeah, we had a good relationship, friendship, and she's a cisgender woman. And she, in return, told me that she was positive, and she offered to take me to her support group. And that's how I met other people who had, been positive. Because at that time, for me, I had heard of HIV. I never thought anything else about it. It was out of sight, out of mind. And I do remember when the doctor told me I was HIV positive, I said, how long am I gonna live? And he did just like this. He didn't know what to say. And I didn't know until about maybe a year and a half later that I could fire my doctor and I got another doctor because all he told me was I was HIV positive and that I was gonna have to come in like once a month for blood work. So and I seeked out to find a good doctor who could relate or had patients that were trans people. And this was back in 2003. And also at that time, I didn't know there was a word called trans. All I knew was I was a woman. Um, and I was just happy to be on this toolkit kit to help because a lot of social workers, healthcare workers, even peer persons, they don't know how to address or even how to ask a member about IPV. And people don't realize when that happens, it's a long process. Once you're out of it, you're still going to feel like you're in it. So it's been a long journey. I still have a long way to go, but I'm better than I had been in the past. Yeah, and people don't even think about also, and then I want to take over. And then a lot of people don't think about how their kids are in it just as well as they are. They could be in the next room hearing the punching, the all that kind of stuff. I remember I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, but I was always at my grandmother's house because I was an only grandchild. And her and her boyfriend got into it one day. And my grandmother had a long mirror that she had up against the wall, and she was standing by the wall, and they was arguing, and he slapped her head into the mirror. Yeah.
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 Oh, Michaela, thank you so much for sharing your personal story and experience, lifting up why it's so important for us to have these conversations, and appreciate the comments and support that people are putting in the chat. Absolutely is so powerful to hear both yours and Mary Jane's stories, and to be able to put such a powerful perspective on it. And just seeing Eugenia lifted up that her child was her motivation to leave, which is powerful, powerful, powerful. Want to see and take a moment just to check in and see if anybody has any questions they either want to put in the chat, or we can go ahead and you can come off of mute and you can go ahead and just ask it. Raise your hand, come off of mute, ask your question. That way you don't have to do all the typing. All right. Yeah, thank you, Shelby.
Comment. I just want to say I commend you both. It takes strength to be able to open up and share that. Mary Jane, I'm sorry that happened to you, and the fact that you did learn that you had to fire your doctor, that you had the right to fire your doctor, and you did it, and you're teaching other people to do the same thing, that is like courage and recovery in your courage, and hearing your story, it kind of saddened me a little bit. But thank you so much for sharing. What's your name? Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah. LaDon, thank you so much. Nicaila and Mary Jane are such incredible
Favors.
advocates. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
such incredible advocates, and really so gracious at sharing their story.
Mhm.
So oh yeah, Eugenia, welcome.
Hi, I'm not feeling my best today, so I'm not gonna turn my camera on. But and maybe this was mentioned, I'm not sure, but I do have a question about has there been like an uptake in violence against cisgender and transgender women um living with HIV? Has there been an uptake in the violence towards them in IPV?
I'm gonna say I know here in the state of Georgia, all I can say for the past month that I've seen on the news, I've seen at least three of cis women. A lot of times when it comes to the transgender community, it is not often reported. I know here, if it is reported, they're always misgendered, and they go to the fault of that, not disclosure of HIV, but disclosure of being a trans person.
Yeah.
Mm.
Ashley, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think we have current numbers. And like I said, the previous studies that have been done, I think, are an underrepresentation as it is. So I think it'll be interesting to even go and have a more current study and look at what the data shows. I know we're in the process of collecting our annual data on survivors served in one day. So it'll be curious for just this year to see like what's the difference from 2024 to 2025 for all survivors in programming, and just to kind of see like what's the shift been in the last year. And I know the hotline does a lot of data collection as well, but I think, it'll be interesting as we kind of look at the data for over the next 12 months, what kind of shifts are we going to see? But I think there needs to be more money dedicated to research, at this intersection. There hasn't been a lot to really, dedicated to working with women living with HIV, to working with, anyone living with HIV who's experiencing intimate partner violence, and, their experience, and really doing a lot more work here. It's been, a lot of PWN and need to be doing this work and trying to figure things out, but there's not a ton of current supporting data, which is unfortunate.
Can I all just
Thank you.
I just thank you for answering my question. The reason why I asked this question is because it seems as though really like in the last couple of weeks, I have been seeing a lot of people on social media, TikTok and internet, Instagram, going live and exposing people, telling, putting their picture up, telling their name. It's just been horrible. I mean, like I had two that popped up on my feed yesterday, and I personally, I haven't seen this much action like this on social media, but lately it's starting to be more and more, and I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. It's almost like we're, not just going backwards with our, our laws and regulations, but just the mentality of people.
Eugenia. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that is such a great point to highlight. And I think part of it is that we have social media. And so we're able to connect with people across the United States that we normally wouldn't hear from. And when we were getting ready to do this webinar, we wanted to specifically lift up that unfortunately, so much of what has happened with our current administration has given permission to people to be, especially, unfortunately, white, cisgender, heteronormative men, permission to be violent, whether it is physically violent, emotionally violent, verbally abusive, against women, trans and cisgender women, against children, against people of color, against immigrants. I mean, I think that we're seeing, I do believe that we're seeing an uptick in violence against people in this year. And I just want to say, for me, so I've been doing HIV advocacy work for 34 years now. And what I have always been so aware of is, as Sarah and Meta mentioned earlier, many people don't report because of what is at stake. They might lose their job, they might have their status disclosed, they might lose control over where their family is or how safe their family is. They might be tossed out of their church. When we talk about disclosure of HIV status, there's stuff that happens. And when you sit in a support group with women and people in feminine bodies who are talking about living with HIV, almost every single person has some experience, whether it's with intimate partner violence or whether it's with systemic violence, whether it's with something that has happened recently or in the past. Almost everyone has some experience with it, and many have not reported for a number of reasons. So yeah, and Ashley put in the chat that this is a key tactic of abusive folks as they seek out vulnerabilities. Marcia, I'm going to go ahead. I see you got your hand raised and I want to hear your question. I want to go ahead just real quick because we're going to start losing people. And I want to go ahead and say, it is so important for us to acknowledge the people who helped us write this toolkit. We have listed their names here, and also we want to lift up with gratitude the Positively Safe team who helped us develop this toolkit and are our ongoing partners. We have the amazing Ashley, and also Robin, Diane, and Akela have been partners over the years, lifting up and really supporting even financially. And I'm going to name that because it's so important that there is like, yay, the work you do is great, and praise, praise, praise. And then there is helping us pay people to be able to do the work. And that is so important as well as we talk about livelihood and people surviving. So thank you. Thank you to our PWN members and the Positively Safe team who helped with this. Our asks are simple around disclosure. We want to make sure that people understand the risks that we carry. If you don't understand them, please learn and talk, and hopefully you have learned something from us here today. PWN has our day of action to end violence. It's October 1st. If you go to our PWN website, you'll have a chance to see our amazing statement and also the video that we were able to put together with help from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. It's a powerful, powerful video. I can't say it's one of my favorite, but it is one of the ones that for sure lifts up what it feels like to be someone who is living with HIV and has experienced vulnerabilities to violence. Finally, here's all of our contact information. Please, please, please take a minute or two to fill out the survey. You can use the QR code here. We will also send out all of the links to everyone who joined us today. Once again, we are so grateful to everyone who realized how important this topic was and joined us here today. So we're going to go ahead and thank all of our presenters and Ashley and Mary Jane and Nikayla. But Marcia, I want to get to your question as well, but I did want to sort of wrap up because people are going to start dropping off, and I want to get that survey in there. You know, it lets us know how we can do this better so we continue to improve and lift up the voices of the people that we know need to be heard. So, Marcia, if you're still there, I'd love to hear your question or a comment that you had.
It's a comment and a question. I am currently being stalked. Um, there's someone who was living in my house because I was trying to be kind to them. MJ, I really understand you. I was really identified with you because trying to help the world, and I couldn't get rid of them. And when I tried to call the police, they told him to stay. And when I called them again because he was trying to break into my room, they told me to leave. Now, the thing about it was, he was living in my home, not paying a single dime. Now, he's calling me Saturday. He called me 77 times. That doesn't include the times he called on the video. The police, when I was young, a teenager, I was sexually assaulted. And the police department treated me like I was a perp and him like he was a victim. So everybody's telling me to go to the police and report this. How can you, this is my question, how do you trust the police when they are part of the problem?
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm sorry I'm not on camera because I'm at work.
You're okay. You're okay. You don't have to come on camera. Yeah. And you are not the only person with that experience of feeling like the police are not helpful and they are part of the problem, right? If you are comfortable letting me know where you're based, I could might be able to locate some resources that could help you. If you're interested in that, I'd be more than happy to connect with you. Whatever I can, provide to support you. Domestic violence programs are not perfect, but they do have advocates across the country that are familiar with more local resources that can provide you with advocacy, that know more specific state laws around, you know, uh, sorry, tenant rights and laws, and can help with eviction and things like that if someone is living in your home uninvited. I know of other survivors who have had these experiences and have had to work with the advocate and lawyer in those situations. But I'd be happy to help you and try and get you connected with folks if that would be helpful.
Yes, I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. Ironically, I'm a social worker.
Yeah.
So when you said that, I'm like, well, right now I need someone.
Totally understand.
Especially today, I just lost my first patient.
Yeah. If you feel comfortable, send me an email and I can gather some information. And if you would like to
I'm gonna
call
put
me.
my email in the chat.
Okay.
Hey, Marcia, don't put your email up in the chat. I'm going to go
I
ahead
just
and
did
remove
it.
it. Yep, that's all right. I'm going to remove it.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and I'll connect you and Ashley, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that way, you're as protected as possible.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really sorry that's a situation that you're in. Hopefully we can.
He was my boyfriend, but when
Yeah.
I told him he could stay at my house, it was so he could get the money to get his own place. And I was on disability. He was working 2 full-time jobs. And after I told him he had 3 to 4 months, he never would leave. I had to move to a new place to get him to leave.
Oh boy.
I'm so wrong.
I don't have the option to raise my hand on here. I do apologize.
Hey, Yolanda, welcome.
Hey, Barb, thank you. I was listening to, I'm sorry I missed MJ's share, but I did hear, I can't remember your name.
Nicalis.
Nikayla. I did hear Nikayla's story and it resonated with me because it sounded like so familiar. The only difference being me being cisgender. That is it. But your story is my story, and wow. I know that when it comes to intimate partner violence, and a lot of different cities have um, victims advocate programs. But usually one of the first steps is filing, yes, Grace, a restraining order. And sometimes that can be frustrating because we feel like, what good is the restraining order going to do when we've been told it doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. I was told that if you try to leave, I'm going to kill you, things like that. So it can be very intimidating and scary to even move forward in the process. But if you find the strength and if you have that network of support, if we have that network of support and we find the strength to take those steps, those services are there for us and they help me. I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we had women in distress. And so, I took advantage of the group therapy sessions. I took advantage of the monetary assistance to relocate. Um, just speaking up for me when when charges were filed and I wanted to drop the charges because I don't know if anybody else is like me, but once he went to jail, after a few weeks of, oh baby, I'm sorry and I'm gonna change and all this and that, like, my heart would melt and I'd be like, okay, my kids need their father and all, and this kind of stuff. But the victims advocates were there to fight for me when I was unable or unwilling to fight for myself. um, the struggle is definitely real, and I am great. I am so grateful. Yep, I am so grateful that while I didn't know about PWN during that time of my life, you know, but that we do have an organization of supportive women with the same lived experience, and we are able to draw on your strength and your support, and we are able to provide that strength and support to those who need it. So I just wanted to share that.
Yolanda, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences and the similarities. And we're putting our gems always into the chat, and the your story is my story. That is so much of why we come together and we talk about things that are hard, is that we know that there is so much that brings us together and lifts up how we're able to survive and even come to a place where we're thriving for some of us. It's a powerful, beautiful thing. So just want to go ahead and say, if you want to, we have the emails of our presenters on here. Feel free to reach out to any of them. They have said that they would welcome emails from folks. And you can also reach out to me or to Grace or to Ashley if you have any questions. I just want to take a moment and see if there's anyone else who wants to say anything.
I just want to,
Yeah.
real quick, Barb, can I thank everyone for coming, and thank you all for your stories. They resonate in all of us, and I want to thank you for the courage to tell your stories. And let us know if there's anything we can ever do, if there's something going on, right now or happens shortly, please.
Mary Jane, thank you. That's such a great way. I'm going to actually go to Nikayla and then to Ashley for a final thought, and then we'll go ahead and close out. Nikayla, to you.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out to listen and the PWN staff. I want to say that we're all in this together and we'll get through it, whether you're supporting someone or have been a survivor. And things will get better.
Thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for sharing. It's just amazing to get to work with you all every day and continue to do this work. And, I feel like every time I get to be on these calls and these webinars and these meetings, I feel like, my cup is filled again. I feel like, especially now when we're all feeling a little, I don't know, emotionally run down, to be, I don't know, refreshed. It's so important. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate every single one of you. And if like Barb said, if I can do anything, please reach out. I'll do whatever I can to be of support.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Appreciate each and every one of you for being on and helping to present this difficult but really critical conversation. It is, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and our Day of Action. It always is a heavy month, but like everyone on this call, I feel so like my heart is broken open. My heart is broken open, and I am so grateful to each and every person who has both trusted us with their stories and who comes together with community, because we know how we go ahead and survive and change the world. So I'm going to go ahead and end us there. Thank you, everyone, for being on. I'm going to stop our recording.